Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission and Commission staff, we are pleased to appear before you today to discuss the ownership and control of Globalive. My name is Ken Engelhardt, and I am the Senior Vice President Regulatory for Rogers Communications. To my left is Bill Linton, Executive Vice President Finance and Chief Financial Officer, and to his left is David Miller, Senior Vice President and General Counsel. To my right is Lorraine Daly, Vice President and Treasurer, and to Lorraine's right is Howard Slaughter, Director of Regulatory Matters. All of the levers of control available to an investor must be looked at together to determine whether an investor can exercise control in fact of a corporation. Orascom possesses certain rights, some of which on their own are sufficient to exercise control in fact. Taking these rights together, Orascom has a dominant and determining influence over Globalive. Globalive attempts to minimize Orascom's control by addressing in isolation individual levers of control. In their reply comments, Globalive correctly pointed out that there have been cases in which foreign shareholders have owned 65% of the equity, and the company was found to pass the Canadian ownership rules. They point out that there have been instances in which a foreigner held all or substantially all of the debt, and the company was found to pass the foreign ownership rules. There have also been situations where a foreign shareholder was allowed to control the brand of a Canadian broadcaster or telecom carrier, and or provide strategic and operational advice. However, Globalive has failed to identify a single case where a single foreign partner filled all three roles: majority shareholder, majority debt holder, and strategic partner, where the carrier is dependent on the foreigner's brand and technological expertise. The pervasiveness of the levers granted to Orascom in the debt agreements, the shareholders' agreements, the technology agreement, and the trademark agreement is, to Rogers' knowledge, unprecedented in the context of companies that have been considered to be Canadian-owned and controlled. The net result of Orascom's tripartite role as majority debt and shareholder and strategic investor is that there is not a single significant strategic or operational decision that Globalive can make without Orascom's permission. Globalive seeks to avoid past precedents and the legal test for control by appealing to the policy objective of fostering increased competition in wireless markets. This would not be an appropriate modification of the legal test. There is only one policy governing this proceeding, and that is the decision made 20 years ago by the Government of Canada that the telecommunications carriers must be owned and controlled by Canadians. This policy was enshrined in both the policy objectives and the eligibility requirements of the Telecommunications Act, as well as the associated regulations. These rules bind Rogers and our competitors, whether incumbents or new entrants. Interpreting the Canadian ownership and control provisions differently for incumbents and new entrants, as Globalive proposes, would not be proper. In fact, it would be an error of law. The CRTC's decision in this proceeding will have ramifications beyond Globalive. It will reset the bar and establish the precedent for what constitutes Canadian ownership and control, not just for the new entrants, but for all carriers, including Rogers, Bell, Telus, Shaw, and Quebecor. Precedents in the telecom sector will also have ramifications for the broadcasting sector, where the ownership and control regulations are very similar. If you determine that Orascom does not control Globalive, an international wireless giant like Verizon could acquire the same rights and interests in Rogers, Bell, or Telus as Orascom has in Globalive, without running afoul of the rules. As CIBC stated in a report released last week, letting Globalive in today could set an unintended but very important precedent for the future. If Orascom could create an ownership structure that gives it most of the upside that comes with a majority economic stake, with call options, veto rights, and indirect board control to protect itself from the local investors' voting control, then other foreign players could do the same. Orascom would be effectively giving foreign telecom operators a blueprint to emulate someday. The Commission has endorsed the test for control in fact established by the National Transportation Agency in the Canadian Airlines case. Under that test, control is defined as the ongoing power or ability, whether exercised or not, to determine the strategic decision-making activities of an enterprise, or the ability to manage and run the day-to-day operations of an enterprise. The determination of control, in fact, rests on the accumulation of influence that can be exercised by an investor over the management or strategic decision-making activities of the company. While certain individual rights may not result in control, the totality of influence may translate into control. This was another key element of the NTA's formulation of the control, in fact, test. As discussed below, under the headings that the Commission has formulated, the facts before you in this case present a number of factors that individually give rise to a finding of control in fact by Orascom. Taken together, they lead overwhelmingly to such a finding. Bill?
One of the key methods used by Orascom to exert control over Globalive is the $508 million in loans it has provided Globalive, which according to Globalive's reply remarks is the seed capital that has been invested in the company. While we understand that Globalive's landline business was rolled into the new company, nothing in the public record shows that any significant cash was invested other than through the Orascom loans. The loan covenants provide Orascom with control over both day-to-day and strategic decisions of Globalive. Some of the matters over which Orascom has a veto, and you've heard these before, are things like making capital expenditures or capital leases in excess of $10 million, changing of the business plan, borrowings in excess of $20 million, granting security over assets, and making dividend payments. Now, the events of default under the terms of the loan provide Orascom with further control. Even if the loan's extension periods have already been exercised by Globalive, as claimed in their reply comments, the maturity of the loans is quite short. In any event, Section 7.1f of the loan agreement allows Orascom to declare an event of default whenever, in its opinion, something adversely affects Globalive in a material way. Effectively, this means that the loan is almost callable by Orascom on demand. Now, this power provides Orascom with an enormous amount of control, even if it's just a threat. You've also heard that the Orascom loans carry interest rates of up to 18%, which will result in the loan doubling in 5 years. This effectively adds an enormous economic burden to the venture, to the benefit of Orascom. So the magnitudes of the loans and the interest rates, together with the loan covenants, permit Orascom to exercise control in fact over Globalive. Now, in the Ace Aviation case, the CTA found that when the lender and the borrower are not operating on an arm's length basis, when the lender is not a financial institution, lender control is most likely to occur. Now, the CTA found that the restrictive covenants in General Electric's loan agreements reflected an arm's length relationship and marketplace terms and conditions. Unlike Orascom's role in relation to Globalive, General Electric did not have veto rights over the appointment of officers, a voting stake in Ace Aviation, rights to approve Ace Aviation's business plans, and control over day-to-day operations. In the Globalive case, the loans are not at arm's length, and the covenants contain significant approval rights. Orascom is the lender, has a voting stake, can approve the business plans, and veto some operational decisions. Moreover, Orascom is not simply the holder of the majority of Globalive's debt, it also owns the majority of Globalive's equity and is a strategic investor with the wireless expertise and the brand. The Commission has recognized that the combination of even two of these roles, majority equity and debt holder, raises serious controls and fact concerns. The CanWest decision is a case in point. The facts of this case confirm those concerns. Now, the current economic structure, which you've heard before and presented by Globalive, has Orascom holding 65% approximately of the total equity. Now, these numbers are very high. Significantly, however, they do not appear to capture Orascom's full economic interest in Globalive. Orascom's $508 million worth of loans, described in Orascom's reply comments as seed capital, in our opinion, should be considered additional equity and considered as part of the total economic interest. Orascom is contributing 100% of the risk capital, and even if you assume that AAL's company that was contributed could be valued at $100 million, that Orascom's economic interest is 80%, and remember that it is growing at a rate of up to 18%, or another $100 million a year. And this is far higher than any previous precedent. David.
AAL does not have the right to appoint a majority of the directors. AAL holds 2/3 of the votes of the Globalive holding company, yet appoints the same number of directors as Orascom, who only holds 1/3 of the votes. Each company can vote to appoint 2 directors. A 5th director, effectively the tiebreaker, or the swing vote as Mr. Campbell described this morning, is appointed by a committee composed of 1 AAL appointee, 1 Orascom appointee, and the president of Globalive's wireless company. A shareholder that truly controls a corporation controls the board. If AAL truly controlled this company, AAL would appoint 3 directors and Orascom would appoint 2. This means that AAL does not have any countervailing power through the board to offset the overwhelming financial interest of Orascom and its many levers of control, not to mention its size and experience in the wireless sector. The shareholders' agreements further confirm that Orascom is the investor with control in fact of Globalive, while AAL's presence may be both optional and temporary. Orascom, as you've heard, controls when to sell and who to sell to. Orascom can effectively sell the company out from under AAL and can force AAL out of the company. For its part, AAL can exit Globalive through its put rights. As filed, the shareholders' agreements provide Orascom with a call right, exercised in years 2 to 5, which allows Orascom to force AAL to sell its shares in Globalive at a price equal to the greater of fair market value and an undisclosed but presumably pre-established price. This means that Orascom can force AAL out of Globalive in this time frame at its discretion. We've heard this morning that this call right has now been replaced with a new dispute resolution mechanism, which we've not yet seen. And of course, these type of provisions can still operate ultimately in the same manner as basically as a put call. Subject to the rights of first refusal, Orascom also has the right to drag along AAL shares in any sale to a third party that involves more than 51% of Orascom shares. This means that if Orascom finds a buyer for Globalive, AAL must tender its shares as well, even if it does not want to. Moreover, Orascom has this right regardless of the number of shares it holds in Globalive, and can exercise this right by selling just 51% of its interest. This means that it could force AAL out and replace it with another shareholder while itself remaining a shareholder of Globalive. This is an extraordinary power for a non-Canadian to hold, since the ability to require a sale of a company is a key attribute of control. Importantly, AAL has no corresponding call or drag-along rights. It has the right to exit the wireless venture at any time during the first 5 years and to leave the wireless business with Orascom, subject again to comments earlier this morning about proposed changes to the agreement, which we have not yet seen. But according to the agreements as filed, AAL could remove its landline business and exit its holding at any time up to March 2010. And then after that, for the next 4 years, there would be a put right. We're now told that that put right is exercisable on a one-time basis in 2013, but if the formula remains the same, it would be at the greater of fair market value or an undisclosed but presumably fixed price. Now, normally it's the controlling Canadian shareholder or the controlling shareholder in any event that has the call and drag-along rights, and the non-controlling shareholder has a put right. This was the case, for example, with respect to Goldman Sachs' investment in CanWest. In this case, the roles are entirely reversed. Orascom has the call and drag-along that allow it to force the sale of AAL shares in Globalive, while AAL has a put that appear to allow it to exit the business on an apparently risk-free basis. A non-controlling shareholder would never normally agree to a buyout of a controlling shareholder at a fixed minimum price, since the controlling shareholder could normally take steps that significantly affect the value of the company. Similarly, a controlling shareholder would never normally agree to give a non-controlling shareholder the right to push it out of the company or to sell the company out from under it. The reversal of the normal liquidity rights clearly shows that Orascom is in control. AAL, in contrast, appears to be along for what could be a risk-free ride with the apparent ability to exit at a pre-agreed price. As mentioned earlier, there are a number of veto agreements from the shareholders' agreement at relatively nominal amounts given the size of the enterprise. $5 million for contracts, granting of security interest, debt in excess of $20 million, and any change to the business plan that may affect projected revenues, expenditures, or cash flows by more than 10% during the then current period. These powers, which are exercised by Orascom and not by the directors appointed by Orascom, give Orascom effective control over the day-to-day operations of Globalive, as well as its strategic decisions. A $5 million threshold for contracts is a trivial amount in the context of a national wireline carrier. Even a small handset order is likely to exceed this threshold. Second, any ability to veto the business plan gives rise to significant influence over a company. In this case, there is also no apparent mechanism to break a deadlock, meaning that if Orascom refuses to approve a change in the business plan, AAL has no option but to accede to Orascom's direction. We were advised this morning that there may be put-call provisions in the shareholders' agreement that would be added to resolve fundamental deadlocks. However, given the inequality of power as between Orascom and AAL, a put-call would certainly not be an adequate remedy to resolve deadlocks over the business plan. Now, again, it's Orascom that exercises these veto rights, not the directors appointed by Orascom that have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of Globalive. Orascom is under no such obligation. Practically speaking, the Orascom veto rights ensure that there are few steps that Globalive can take without Orascom's blessing. As described, Globalive is not a simple financial investment made by a non-strategic financial institution. Orascom is a strategic investor with all of the economic clout, financial risk, wireless know-how, and ownership of the WIN brand. As a strategic investor, Orascom actively participates at all levels of the management and operation of Globalive and has done so since the beginning. Globalive was established in the 2008 AWS auction. Contrary to the stories in the press, we understand that Orascom was solely in control of the auction process. According to the GIHC shareholders agreement, sole bidding authority during the auction was held by Michael O'Connor, at the time an Orascom employee. Furthermore, Orascom had the sole authority to order a wind-up of the entire project if it, and not Mr. Lacavera, felt insufficient spectrum had been acquired to meet Orascom's business objective of building out a wireless network in Canada. This, of course, is not surprising, as Orascom had put up all the money to participate in the auction, and it was only fair they had all the decision-making power. Orascom has continued its control by ensuring that two top positions at Globalive Wireless have been filled by people it knows and trusts, namely ex-employees of Orascom or its affiliates, and in addition has entered into technical services and brand license agreement with Globalive. Under the technical service agreement, all the key functions can be outsourced to Orascom. The fees payable under this agreement apparently are payable whether or not Globalive expertise is actually retained. In addition, if there is a change in ownership of more than 51% of the company, then Orascom has the option to terminate the agreement. The ability of the company to terminate the agreement in this case, or rather the lack of the company to terminate the agreement in this case, could very well be an impediment to any potential purchaser because of the guarantee fee. Globalive, on the other hand, may become extremely dependent on the technology platforms and other expertise provided under this agreement. And the agreement does provide that on termination, all intellectual property must be returned to Orascom. Globalive's operational independence was further compromised when it accepted the Win trade name. This will make Globalive even more reliant on Orascom. The agreement's termination rights, which we have not seen, could provide the trademark holder with arbitrary power over the continued use of the brand. This could leave AAL and Globalive high and dry if Orascom ever leaves Globalive, since Globalive would lose all the goodwill it builds up in the Win trademark in Canada. There's also no evidence of a cooling off period following termination, during which Orascom would be precluded from re-entering Canada and using the Win brand, or during which Globalive, on a transitional basis, could continue using the Win brand. The only conclusion is that this concession was clearly reflective of the fact that Globalive accepted it because it is in fact controlled by Orascom. Thus, Orascom's power to terminate the use of the Win brand could operate as a significant threat and lever of control, given the significant cost and time required to launch a new brand as recognized by the Commission in the ESPN decision.
Orascom's rights and powers clearly give it the ability to exercise strategic and operational control over Globalive. Let's look at it from AAL's perspective. AAL cannot control the board. It cannot authorize a change in the business plan by more than 10%. It cannot authorize the sale of the company. It cannot authorize any significant capital investments. It cannot authorize any significant purchases. It cannot authorize the distribution of any dividends. In each of the above instances, Orascom has the final say. Orascom holds the majority of the equity and the debt of Globalive and virtually all of the economic interest in the company. In contrast, AAL holds a minority equity position and virtually no debt. Orascom's vetoes over any purchases over $5 million, changes in the business plan in excess of 10%, capital expenditures in excess of 10%, and additional debt effectively means that Orascom controls all material spending by Globalive, and AAL must accede to Orascom's wishes. One question the Commission could ask itself is this: does Globalive represent a Canadian company with a non-Canadian backer, or a non-Canadian entrant using a Canadian company as a front or accommodation party? The following 5 factors clearly show that Orascom is the controlling shareholder of Globalive and AAL is simply an accommodation party. First, AAL surrendered its ability to appoint a majority of the board of directors. A controlling shareholder would insist on appointing 3 out of the 5 available seats on the board and assert control over Globalive's activities. Second, in the documents as filed, during the first year of the venture, AAL can exit the project, removing its original landline business intact. This demonstrates that neither AAL nor the Globalive landline business play an essential role within the new wireless venture. Both are replaceable. Now, they have informed the Commission this morning that they have waived that right. Third, AAL has a put option that permits it to force Orascom to find a purchaser for AAL shares at a guaranteed minimum price. Under the documents as filed, AAL can ask Orascom to arrange the purchase of AAL shares at any time in years 2 to 5, and the presumably pre-established price means that AAL appears to be guaranteed a minimum return by Orascom for its role as the Canadian shareholder. We've been told this morning that the right cannot be exercised until 2013, but I think the point remains the same. Fourth, Orascom has a call option for AAL shares that permits Orascom to force AAL to sell the shares. Controlling shareholders have call options. Controlling shareholders do not give non-controlling shareholders the right to evict them from the company they control. As Mr. Miller mentioned, They've apparently waived the call, but will be replacing it with a dispute resolution mechanism, which we have not seen. And fifth, Orascom can drag AAL shares along if Orascom wants to sell out. AAL has no corresponding right. Controlling shareholders who lead ventures have drag-along rights. This allows them to decide when to sell the company and ensure the non-controlling shareholders comply. The fact that AAL does not have this right shows that they are just along for the ride. The fact that Orascom has a drag-along right shows that Orascom is in control. These 5 factors demonstrate overwhelmingly that AAL is an accommodation party that can be replaced at Orascom's will. Thank you.